11 years in prison for a crime he did not commit. Here we go again. Hello, true crimeers. This is the case of Michelle O'Keefe. Viewer discretion is advised. Michelle O'Keefe was born on October 11th, 1981, and she lived her entire life in California. Michelle's parents would describe her as an incredibly lively person, very energetic, and also very down to earth. She was just someone who enjoyed, just her normal day-to-day life. Not much really ever seemed to get her down. She was extremely close with her parents. It was a very loving household. In school, she always got solid grades. She never missed school, and she was a cheerleader at her high school. And because she was a cheerleader, that would kind of lead to her sort of just naturally having a lot of friends. She had a really big circle of friends that all just absolutely adored her. But something her parents would also note is that Michelle wasn't the type of person who just was friends with the popular kids at school. She actually would prefer being with the kids who maybe weren't as popular. She wanted to be friends with to basically have representation of every type of person in her friend group. She was extremely amicable. She was incredibly friendly, super charming. And when this happened to Michelle, it just completely sent a shockwave throughout the entire community. Because why Michelle? It was February 22nd, 2000. Michelle O'Keefe is now at this point 18 years old, and her and a friend named Jennifer Peterson were actually going to be attending a Kid Rock concert that they were filming into a music video. And they were, possibly going to be in that music video. It's just kind of crowd surfing wise. And as a matter of fact, I'm showing a photo where you can actually see where she was, in fact, in the video. It was a great little night for her and her friend. Now, when they drove to the concert, Michelle actually left her car, which was a blue Mustang, which was her pride and joy. That was it was her kid, basically. She left it at this parking lot, and she specifically left it under a well-lit light. That way, you kind of hopefully eliminate the risks of anything happening to the car. And then she got into Jennifer's car and they went to the concert. And after the concert was done, they would drive back to the parking lot where Michelle left her car. Jennifer parked right behind her. She watched Michelle get out. They said goodbye, see you tomorrow. And she watched Michelle get into the front seat of her car. She saw the lights turn on. She heard the engine click on. And so Jennifer at that point decides to back out, and she left the parking lot because the assumption was, all right, she's in her car, she's safe, and now she's on her way home. Unfortunately, that was not the case. Roughly 2 minutes goes by since Jennifer left the parking lot. Just 2 minutes. And there is a 25-year-old security guard there named Raymond Jennings. He had just gotten the job, I think, a day prior. He had served in the United States military. He was a sergeant at one point. And later he would tell police that he heard the sound of just gunfire. And what he did was, I guess he kind of ducked behind his car, just to make sure bullets weren't flying everywhere, just to kind of keep himself safe. So he goes on his radio and he contacts his boss. Her name was Iris. And, he tells her over the radio, there have been shots fired. I don't know where they're coming from in the parking lot. And so Iris Malone goes to the parking lot area to see what's going on. He would point out to Iris that that blue Mustang, it looked like it had moved because it was found kind of at an angle, and the car was sort of partially on this little ledge that kind of separated areas of the parking lot, and the driver's side door was open, and there was a leg hanging out of it. And the car was still running. It was still on. Now, Iris Malone says, okay, we're going to go approach this car, and apparently Raymond Jennings says, I'm not doing that. I'm not going close to that car. So Iris Malone drives up to the vehicle, and she finds a deceased person in the driver's side of the car. A young woman was slumped over to the side, and she had clearly had blood all over her face because she had been shot numerous times. And so they called police. Now, while Iris was sitting by the car, apparently she would say that another vehicle kind of just sort of casually drove up to the scene and then drove out of the parking lot. When police arrived, they processed the scene. There really wasn't a ton of evidence there. They did find that there was like an earring stud on the passenger side of the car. The victim was not wearing any earrings. They also found a wallet kind of shoved in between the seats, and it had money inside of it. But the identity of the person in the car, by using the ID they found in the wallet and just simply by looking, they could determine that the victim was in fact 18-year-old Michelle O'Keefe. They also found a shell casing from a 9mm handgun next to the vehicle, and it would be confirmed that she was shot with a 9mm. They had blood evidence found underneath her fingernails, and it did not, when they processed all of that, it did not appear to be her blood. And as a matter of fact, there was blood of an unknown male. So it's possible that this person approached the car, maybe to carjack her, maybe to rob her. He got close enough that she was able to kind of like scratch him, and then maybe he retaliated and shot her. They really don't know exactly what the motive was for certain at that point. Because her wallet was there with cash in it, they kind of assumed this may have been a robbery that turned out bad because she was missing earrings. So fast forwarding now to March, a woman named Victoria Richardson would come forward to police. She said that she was present in the parking lot around the time the murder occurred. And she was there with her godson, and then also a friend of theirs, and then that friend's boyfriend. She tells police that she heard a loud popping sound, like glass popping, as if someone was trying to pry open a window or something that ended up shattering glass. But I don't believe there was any shattered glass found at the scene. I think she was just guessing what the sound might have been. Victoria would tell police that she saw a Toyota vehicle, a black Toyota, with a white man wearing a red cap driving the car, had basically sped out or quickly left the parking lot right after all these noises were heard. Now, they didn't come forward right away about this because they were actually smoking pot in the car, and they felt they would get in trouble. Now, Victoria would tell police also that before they left the parking lot, they kind of drove up to where Raymond Jennings was, the security guard, and they asked him, hey, what's going on? And he just said, I don't know. And that was it. And then they left. Now, Raymond Jennings had been interviewed on February 25th first. He told police, I just started working here literally the day prior to this. When he says that when he heard the gunshots, he took cover because he was concerned that the gunman was still in the area and it was dark, and so he couldn't see. He would also tell police that at some point later that two men in a truck came to the parking lot asking about the murder and if he had been on duty when that murder happened, which actually freaked him out because he thought, well, maybe this is the actual killer, wanting to know if I saw anything. And so he ends up quitting that job out of fear. A few days go by after this first interview, and police would collect the uniform that Raymond Jennings was wearing that night. They tested it for blood. They tested it for gunshot residue. It was clean. Like, there was no forensic evidence found. There were no fibers, no hairs, nothing. So they questioned him again on March 23rd, 2000. So Raymond Jennings, like I kind of mentioned earlier, he was a veteran of the Iraq War. He was in the California National Guard, and he owned a .380 caliber handgun. He said that he was an expert with an M16 rifle and an M9 Beretta, which was a military version of a 9mm, I guess. I'm not a gun person, so I don't know for sure. Well, he told police in this interview that he doesn't recall seeing anyone flee the parking lot in a car immediately after the gunshots were heard. So he thinks that the person who shot her fled on foot. He was then interviewed again on April 7, 2000. He was there for several hours, and the police told him to kind of write down sort of everything that happened that night. And he wrote down things that police would later determine were actually inaccurate. They did not match the scene. They did not match the other witness statements. When this interview is over with, they now suspect Raymond Jennings as being responsible for the murder of Michelle O'Keefe. And they tell him point blank, you are now our number one suspect. This would actually prompt Michelle O'Keefe's family to file a wrongful death lawsuit against Raymond Jennings, because at that point he had not been arrested or charged with anything. Eventually, though, the lawsuit was thrown out. I mean, there just wasn't anything to go with to present that case at a trial. And this is a great example of like the court of public opinion having a much heavier effect on a case than should be. Because at that point, it sounds like her family and her parents, and listen, I understand completely, but they felt that, since the police were saying that Raymond Jennings was the guy, he's the guy. And so that's our belief now. So in December of 2005 now, Raymond Jennings is actually arrested and he is charged with second-degree murder. And they added on a firearm enhancement charge to it. The prosecution said, we have a case. We have one. So he goes on trial in April of 2008. This is obviously moving very slowly. That case, though, ended in a mistrial. The jury could not agree on his guilt or innocence. So they try again in 2009. Again, it ends in another mistrial, another hung jury. They, again, cannot see how Raymond Jennings was definitely the killer here. He had no motive. He had no physical evidence on him. I believe the blood and the DNA they found underneath her fingernails also did not match him. They found no physical evidence of him in or near that vehicle. They found no physical evidence of Michelle on his person, on his clothing, anywhere in that parking lot. There was no physical evidence whatsoever. So now he goes on trial for a third time, now in December of 2009. They are adamant that this is the guy, despite having no evidence. Not one single witness actually saw the shooting. No one saw for sure anyone running from the parking lots. They didn't see for sure any vehicles definitely speeding away right after the gunshots. I mean, they had a witness who saw a car leaving sometime shortly afterwards, but it sounded like their memory wasn't exactly solid. And so because of this, for the third trial, the prosecution relied very heavily on an FBI agent. This guy's name was Mark Safarik. He was a former FBI agent who then told the jury that this is a photo of him, that he reviewed the evidence to figure out what happened and why it happened and what the perpetrator's motive might have been. He was presented as an expert witness in victimology, the study of victims to determine who might have killed her. So this guy concludes that there is no evidence to support any theory that an acquaintance of Michelle's committed this crime. There was no evidence to suggest that this was a gang-related crime. There was no evidence to suggest that this was a robbery gone wrong. He also was able to rule out somehow, some way, that someone maybe followed her and Jennifer back to the parking lot from the Kid Rock concert. And so he said at this trial that one person committed this, and it had to be someone who was already present at that parking lot. This wasn't like someone waiting in the wings to just shoot and kill some random person. They also presented evidence that, Raymond had a ballistics training. He was in the military. He knew how to use guns. He was skilled in the use of guns, but they didn't find the murder weapon, by the way. They didn't find it anywhere in the parking lot, at the security guard station. They didn't find it at his home or, anywhere. This time, the jury comes back and finds, and heavily relying on that FBI's agent's testimony, the jury came back with a verdict of guilty of second-degree murder. And he would be sentenced to 40 years to life in prison. Time goes by. He submits appeals, sometimes with a lawyer, sometimes without a lawyer. And the courts are just sort of turning him down every which way possible. Then a man named Jeffrey Ehrlich comes forward. He's a lawyer, and he actually goes to Raymond Jennings and say, I will cover your case now pro bono. I'm not going to charge you anything because I feel like you are definitely innocent here. So in May of 2016, the deputy district attorney, Kenneth Lynch, at that time, would end up agreeing to use the conviction integrity unit to re-examine the case just to make sure that a complete investigation was done with this case. So now after this little re-examination of the integrity of the case, the new prosecutor at this point, it's not the same one as that was during the initial trials. The prosecution cited newly discovered evidence that suggested a person or persons other than Mr. Jennings may have actually murdered Miss O'Keefe. Specifically, the prosecution said that the evidence suggested that O'Keefe had been killed by gang members during a robbery, which, if you remember, the FBI agent said there's no way it was done by a gang member. Based on what evidence? I don't know. A gang member who may have done this was actually arrested 4 months after this event happened. They were arrested for carjacking and robbery, in which they stole the car, which just so happened to be also a Mustang. And the carjacking, this guy used a 9mm gun. He was also wearing earrings at the time that were very similar to the earrings that were missing from Michelle O'Keefe's ears that she was wearing that night. So when the FBI agent, this supposed expert victimologist, when he was informed of this new evidence and these new theories, he said that he could now no longer reach the same conclusions that he had reached before in that third trial. Wow, thanks. An expert that was now hired to, again, look into the integrity of this case determined that the evidence would actually show that Michelle was killed during a botched robbery or a gang-related robbery, like I said a few moments ago. Her cell phone was also missing, and that's never been found. The glove compartment of her car had been opened and things had been thrown out of it. Again, suggesting that they were looking for something to steal. They never found her wallet because somehow it ended up wedged into the seat. Now, the ammunition that they believe was used, because, from the bullets they retrieved, I guess they used a combination of different types of bullets. And this suggested to them that the person who did it was actually not familiar with guns at all. So on June 23rd, 2016, based on all of this, these new eyes on this case and the integrity investigation, a judge would actually order that Mr. Jennings would be released on an ankle monitor. By January 23rd, 2017, Judge Ryan, at this point, granted the habeas petition and vacated Jennings' conviction and found Jennings factually innocent, and the prosecution dismissed the charges. It's really important to note, factually innocent. That is a very rare thing. A lot of times they'll just overturn the conviction, and they'll still kind of go with the not guilty aspect. But in this case, the judge says that factually innocent means that Raymond Jennings had nothing to do with this murder. He was there at the parking lot, but there was no evidence to suggest that he did it. The fact that there were other people in that parking lot, this couple of witnesses who saw certain cars and saw people speeding away, the fact that nobody else was looked at other than Mr. Jennings is very telling. It's kind of like, he fits the bill, let's just say he did it, despite no physical evidence, no blood, no hair, nothing that suggests he actually did it. Just he's kind of like a strange guy, I guess. Former member of the United States military, who also is now hired as a security guard, was then hiding behind a car when he heard gunshots. Some people looked at that and go, oh, okay, that's a little strange for someone who knows how to use guns, who's, been involved with guns. But that doesn't mean anything. It could have mean he was just ducking down because he knows gunshots are being fired and he wants to protect his life. In March of 2017, the state of California would award Raymond Jennings $538,000 in compensation. He had spent 11 years in prison for a crime he did not commit. He had spent 11 years in prison for a crime that was pinned on him because that was just the easiest to answer. He spent 11 years in prison because an FBI victimologist came to the conclusion that it had to be him and not all these other things, when then later on it was determined that those other things he said could not have happened are the actually more likely scenarios. Who the f is this guy? Right? And I kind of go back to the court of public opinion, because Michelle O'Keefe's parents and family, they actually still believe that Raymond Jennings is guilty of this. But the prosecution itself would come out and say, listen, the evidence now expressly excludes Jennings as being the perpetrator, while to the O'Keefes and others it may feel as unjust to now give Jennings relief, it is even more unjust to keep a man in prison who has been excluded by the lawful authorities as the perpetrator. I understand. The parents, they need someone, right? In my opinion, though, I'd be like, I would want to know for certain that they got the right person. I would want to know that with 100% certainty. If there's doubt surrounding the person who was convicted, if there is now actual, the prosecution, the judge, other experts are now saying he did not do it, I would go, okay, well then let's find out who did. But I do also get that, they had this guy, they had this name, and that stuck with them. I understand they want justice for their daughter. Who wouldn't? And it's an impossible situation to put yourself in until you're actually there. But I just go back to thinking, I, as a family member, would want to know with no doubt whatsoever that they have the right person. Because if they don't have the right person, then I haven't gotten justice yet. My daughter hasn't gotten justice yet. And now potentially a man's in prison who didn't do this, and now he's a victim of all of this. Again, I would just want to know for sure. That's just me. But again, I also understand their point of view completely. So in the end, Michelle O'Keefe, for a brief time, had some kind of justice, but turns out it wasn't the correct justice. And so now her case remains unsolved. And the case now remains cold. What about that gang member that was caught months later? Maybe they don't have the evidence to prosecute him either. I don't know. But there have been no more arrests, no more indictments. There's been nothing. It's been several years now since Jennings was released from prison. You know, he's out there trying to live his life now as best as he can, but obviously it's going to be tough because not just the family, but the court of public opinion applies to everyone. And they're just going to go, well, you were convicted, you were there, you were kind of strange, your behavior, yeah, you did it. Like, despite the court saying you're innocent, yeah, we're going to still believe you did it. And that's the shitty part about stuff like this, is that they will never escape that conviction. Even though they are now deemed innocent, they'll never escape it. They'll be hard to get jobs, hard to do anything because of that public opinion shit. Rant over, sorry. But someone somewhere out there has got to know exactly what happened to Michelle O'Keefe that night and who did this to her and why. What was the motive? Was it robbery? Was it just a random killing? Someone needs to come forward. And if you have that information, please come forward. Please help Michelle O'Keefe get the true justice that she very rightfully deserves. But that is it for this case, True Crime Aruni Dooney Dingleberry Dongs. As usual, hello, my name is Mike. If you are new here, I tell true crime stories here on YouTube and also over on TikTok. Please subscribe to the YouTube channel, hit the like button, leave a comment, share the video because it helps more people see it. Also hit the bell to be notified of when I post a new video. And then over on TikTok, which you can find in the link tree in the description of this video below, I tell short form true crime stories. Feel free to follow that page if you want. And in that link tree in the description below, you'll also find my case list, which is now over 7,000 names long. If you scroll through it and you don't see a name on there that you would like me to cover, just send me a quick email, also listed in the description below. Just the name of the case, where it happened, and when it happened, I'll add it to the list. I typically pick my cases at random. However, if you are a loved one of a murdered victim or a missing person, please let me know you are a loved one because I can make sure that case gets a higher priority once I see the email. But that is it for this video, True Crime Aroonies. So until the next case, ta-ta for now.